Touch Me, Kill Me. A Deadly Intuition Novel. The Marlowe Kane Mysteries, Book 1. Chapter 1. The Body on the Rocks. The thing about living at the edge of the world is that you get used to beauty that would break a normal person. I don't mean that in a poetic way. I mean that literally. The sunrise over Augusta Cliffs at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in September could reduce a tourist to tears. That particular shade of impossible pink, bleeding into gold, bleeding into the kind of blue that makes you understand why ancient people invented gods. The cliffs themselves, 200 feet of sheer black rock dropping straight into churning Pacific water, looked like something a dramatic painter would be told to tone down. And the sound, the constant, bone-deep roar of waves against stone, punctuated by the shriek of gulls, was the kind of ambient noise that either drove you insane or became the rhythm your heart beat to. I'd been here a year. My heart had adjusted. My morning walk along the cliff path was the one ritual I allowed myself. No gloves, because at 6 a.m. nobody was around to accidentally touch. No phone, because the bookshop could survive without me for 45 minutes. Just my boots on the gravel, the wind trying to rearrange my hair into something abstract, and the kind of solitude that felt like medicine. I'm Marlowe Kane, 27. Proprietor of The Vale Between, Augusta Cliffs' only occult bookshop, which I inherited from my dead grandmother, along with a building that smelled like cedar and old paper, a first edition collection worth more than my entire life, and a psychic gift that made physical human contact feel like sticking my hand in someone else's diary. Also inherited, the ghost. But we get to that. The point is, I moved to the edge of the continent, literally, a town perched on cliffs above the Pacific in coastal Alaska, population 2,100, accessible by one road and a lot of determination, to get away from people. From the noise of them. From the constant, overwhelming psychic static of a city full of humans, with their desires and fears and secrets, pressing against my skin like heat through glass. I moved to the edge of the world to get away from dead people. The dead people followed me. I saw it from 30 feet away. A shape on the rocks below the cliff, where the path curved around the headland, and the view opened up to the full, stomach-dropping expanse of the drop. My brain processed it in stages. Shape, wrong shape, too big for driftwood, too still for a seal. Oh God, oh God, oh! The scream came from behind me. A jogger, one of the Kessler Lodge tourists, in brand-new trail shoes and a jacket that cost more than my rent, had rounded the curve and seen it too. She screamed the way people do when reality suddenly includes a body, shrill, sharp, and completely involuntary. I didn't scream. I'd seen enough death in other people's memories to recognize it on sight. The particular stillness. The way gravity claimed a human body differently once the person inside it had left. The shape on the rocks 200 feet below was a man. Face up, arms at strange angles, the surf washing over his legs with the dispassionate rhythm of a tide that didn't care what it was touching. Even from this distance I could see the dark stains on his chest that weren't shadows. Don't look, I told the tourist, which was useless advice that I gave anyway because it felt like the thing a functional person would say. I'll call it in. She was already on her phone, sobbing to a 911 dispatcher. I stood at the edge of the cliff and looked down at the body, and felt the thing I always felt when death showed up uninvited. A pull. Not toward the edge. I wasn't suicidal, just unlucky. But toward the knowing. My gift reaching out like a hand, wanting to touch, wanting to see, wanting to download whatever horror was locked inside that broken body. I put my gloves on. The leather was warm from my pocket. A barrier. A choice. Not yet. By 8 o'clock, the harbor was chaos. The Coast Guard had retrieved the body. The state trooper, singular, because Augusta Cliffs warranted exactly one law enforcement officer, and he was usually busy dealing with drunk fishermen and the occasional tourist who wandered too close to the cliff edge, was on site looking overwhelmed in the specific way of a man who'd signed up for small-town policing and gotten murder instead. I was on the dock because I couldn't stay away. This was a character flaw I was aware of and had no intention of correcting. The harbor smelled the way it always did. Brine, diesel, fish guts, the particular funk of wet rope that had baked in the sun and then been soaked again. Working boats lined the slips. Crabbers, trawlers, a couple of charter vessels for the tourists who wanted to pretend they were rugged. The mountains rose behind the town like a wall, snow-capped even in September, and the water in the harbor was that impossible Alaskan green that looked like someone had dissolved jade. I was cataloging these details because it was easier than thinking about the body. Kane. The voice came from the direction of the biggest crabbing boat in the harbor, the asking price, a vessel that looked like it had been held together by duct tape, stubbornness, and a specific kind of masculine optimism. Its owner was striding down the gangplank, and the fact that he was shirtless, because of course he was, because he'd been mid-haul when the radio call came in, and apparently putting on a shirt was an unreasonable ask, meant that the entire dock got an eye full of Dex Moran's shoulders, which were a municipal hazard. Dex Moran, 29. Born and raised in Orgasta Cliffs. Third-generation fisherman. Blue eyes that crinkled when he laughed, which was often. Sandy hair perpetually damp with salt water. A grin that communicated, with perfect clarity and zero subtlety, exactly what he was thinking at all times. He was thinking about me. He was always thinking about me. I didn't need psychic powers to know that. It was written across his face like a billboard. Moran, I said, which was how we greeted each other, like we were opposing counsel in a court case neither of us wanted to settle. You look like hell, he said, arriving at my side. Salt water was still drying on his chest. His forearms, thick, tanned, ropey with the kind of muscle you got from hauling 300-pound crab pots in freezing water, glistened. I was not looking at his forearms. I was looking at the harbor. The harbor was very interesting. I was failing spectacularly at not looking at his forearms. Let me be specific about the problem, because if this is my narration, I owe the reader honesty. Dex Moran was 6'1" of sun-weathered, salt-crusted, Pacific Northwest fisherman, and he was built like something a Renaissance sculptor would have produced after a very good day. Broad shoulders tapering to a narrow waist. Arms thick without being bulky. Functional muscle, the kind that came from hauling 300-pound crab pots in freezing water, not the decorative kind from gyms. His chest was tanned from working shirtless on the boat, scattered with sun-bleached hair that trailed down his stomach and disappeared into the waistband of jeans that sat low on his hips, because Dex had never once in his life bought jeans that fit properly. His body was a problem I had not solved in 14 months. Other problems I'd solved: heating a building in an Alaskan winter, cataloging occult first editions, cohabitating with a ghost. The problem of Dex Moran's body remained outstanding. Specifically, the problem of wanting to touch it while being a person for whom touch was an occupational hazard that delivered other people's fantasies straight into my nervous system. A man is dead, Dex. I know, that's why you look like hell. You always look like hell when there's a body. He studied me with an expression that was 90% concern and 10% something else, something hotter, something that lived in the space between us like a low-frequency hum. You okay? Fine. Liar. Accurate assessment. I'm fine anyway. He didn't push. That was the thing about Dex that made him dangerous. Not the shoulders, not the grin, not the way he said my name like it was a dare. It was the restraint. He'd learned my boundaries the way he'd learned the ocean, by paying attention, by respecting the currents, by knowing when to push forward and when to hold back. He knew about the gloves, the flinching, the elaborate choreography I performed every day to avoid skin-to-skin contact with other humans. He didn't understand it. I'd never explained the psychic part, not fully, but he respected it. That respect was the most attractive thing about him, and he was already an unfairly attractive man. It wasn't fair. Nothing about Dex Moran was fair. He put a hand on my shoulder. Over my jacket because he knew the rules. The contact was warm, solid, grounding. I felt a hum through the fabric. Not psychic, just the particular warmth of a man who ran hot, who smelled like salt and engine oil, and the particular clean musk of someone who'd been working since 4 a.m. "They're saying it's Hank Oleson," he said quietly. "Old fisherman, been working these waters 30 years. You know him?" I shook my head. "Seen him at the Abyss a few times. Never spoke. He was a good guy. Quiet, kept to himself." Dex's jaw tightened. "Nobody should end up on those rocks." I agreed with the sentiment but not the implication. Nobody accidentally ended up on those rocks. Not from the cliff path, which had a guardrail, and not from the water, which would batter a body against the base of the cliffs, rather than depositing it neatly on the rocks above the waterline. Someone had put Hank Oleson there. And they'd carved something into his chest first. Theo Vasquez arrived at the makeshift morgue, the back room of the harbormaster's office, hastily cleared of nautical charts and smelling of mildew and bad coffee, at 9:15 a.m., wearing a cable-knit sweater the color of oatmeal, and carrying a medical bag that looked like it had seen more action than most ER kits. Theo was Augusta Cliff's only full-time physician, 28, Cuban-American. Dark curls that fell across his forehead in a way that suggested either careful styling or the complete absence of it. With Theo, you could never tell. Wire-rimmed glasses that he was always pushing up his nose. Warm brown skin. A quiet intensity that operated on a frequency most people mistook for shyness, until he looked directly at them and they realized, with a slight lurch in their chest, that he'd been paying attention the entire time. He was the kind of handsome that snuck up on you, and then, once it arrived, refused to leave. Where Dex's attractiveness was immediate, obvious, a neon sign flashing, "Look at me," Theo's was architectural. It revealed itself in stages. First you noticed the hands, surgeon precise, long-fingered, elegant in motion. Then the forearms, leaner than Dex's but defined, the tendons visible when he gripped something. Then the way his sweater, always cable-knit, always in earth tones that complemented his brown skin, hung on his shoulders. He was narrower than Dex, but taller than he appeared, his height disguised by the way he folded himself into spaces, making himself smaller, less threatening, more approachable. Then you noticed his mouth. Full, expressive, the lower lip slightly fuller than the upper in a way that made you think about biting it, which was a thought I was not having, obviously, because I was a professional woman investigating a murder. You'd be in the middle of a conversation about, say, the histological presentation of saltwater drowning, and you'd notice the way his hands moved. Precise, graceful, the hands of someone who could hold a scalpel or a wine glass with equal elegance, and suddenly, you'd lose your entire train of thought. Not that this had happened to me, specifically, more than twice. Marlowe. He set his bag on the table next to the covered body with the calm of someone who dealt with death as a professional matter. "How are you?" "Everybody keeps asking me that." "Because you're standing in a room with a dead man and you haven't blinked in approximately 90 seconds. He put on gloves, latex, medical, the kind that snapped, and lifted the sheet. I watched him work. Theo examining a body was like watching a pianist play. Technical mastery made fluid by practice, every movement purposeful, his face settling into an expression of focused attention that was, and I need to be honest here because this is my narration, and lying to the reader is poor form, extremely attractive. "Not now, Kane. Dead body. Focus." "Hank Oleson," Theo said, age 54. No known medical conditions, cause of death. He paused, leaning closer. His glasses caught the overhead light. "Drowning. Salt water in the lungs, consistent with submersion. But he was found on the rocks above the waterline." Theo looked at me. "Yes, which is anatomically and gravitationally difficult." He turned back to the body and carefully folded down the sheet. The symbols on Hank Oleson's chest hit me like a slap. They weren't random, not the frenzied work of a madman. They were intricate, precise, carved into the skin post-mortem with something sharp and steady. The pattern was almost beautiful, interlocking lines and curves that formed a design I didn't recognize, but that resonated somewhere in the back of my brain, in the part where my grandmother's teachings lived, in the part I tried very hard to keep quiet. These were done after death, Theo said. No vital reaction in the tissue. Whoever did this was calm, skilled, and took their time. Do you recognize the symbols? He was quiet for a moment, tracing the pattern with his eyes. They look old, really old. Not Tlingit, not Yupik. I've seen enough indigenous art to know the difference. This is something else. He straightened up, and when he looked at me, there was something behind the clinical composure. Something that looked a lot like unease. Marlowe, can I speak with you outside? We stepped into the corridor. The harbor master's office was built into the dock infrastructure, all raw timber and salt-stained windows, the sound of the harbor muffled through the walls. We were alone. Theo stood close, closer than he usually did, and spoke quietly. Have you touched the body? No. I think you need to. The words hung in the air between us. Theo knew what I could do, not because I'd told him. I'd never explicitly said I'm a psychic who receives visions through skin-to-skin, contact with people and objects, and the visions are overwhelming, multi-sensory, and completely involuntary. But Theo noticed things. He'd noticed the gloves, the flinching, the way I'd sometimes go pale and distant after an accidental touch. He'd noticed the time I'd brushed against a tourist's hand, and then spent 20 minutes in the bathroom shaking. He'd pieced it together the way a doctor pieces together symptoms, carefully, methodically, without judgment. He'd never asked me to use it before. You think the symbols are connected to something? In my area of expertise, I said, because we had an unspoken agreement to not say the words supernatural or psychic out loud like normal people. I think a man drowned on dry land with pre-colonial symbols carved into his chest, and I think you might be able to see something I can't. He held my gaze. I'll be right here. I looked back at the door. Through the window, I could see Hank Alesson's covered form on the table. I thought about what it would cost me. Touching a dead person was different from touching a living one, more concentrated, more intense, like the difference between a stream and a fire hose. The dead held their final moments close, compressed into a psychic residue that hit like a wall. I'd done it before. I'd regretted it before. But a man was dead. A man with impossible symbols on his chest, and salt water in his lungs, and no good reason to be on those rocks. And my gift, my stupid, inconvenient, life-ruining gift, was the only forensic tool that might actually tell us what happened. Okay, I said, but if I collapse, catch me. Always, Theo said, and the word landed heavier than either of us expected. I pulled off my gloves. The air in the room was cold against my bare hands. Dex had followed us in. I hadn't told him to, hadn't told him not to, either. He stood by the door with his arms crossed and his jaw set, looking like he was bracing for impact. He'd seen me after a vision once, just once, an accidental touch in the bookshop that had left me shaking and incoherent for 10 minutes. He'd held my hair back while I threw up, and then made me tea without asking a single question. Dex showed love through acts of practical kindness and strategic silence, which was either emotionally mature or emotionally avoidant, depending on the day. Both men were watching me with an intensity that had nothing to do with the investigation. I felt it like heat on my skin, their concern, their focus, the particular weight of being the center of two people's attention when those two people were Dex Moran and Theo Vasquez. I lifted the sheet. Hank Alesson's face was slack, gray, the awful neutrality of death. The symbols on his chest seemed to move in the fluorescent light, but that was a trick of my nerves. I'm going to touch his hand, I said, more for myself than for them. It might take a few seconds. I might react. Don't touch me until it's over, or you'll get pulled in. Dex's hands tightened on his own arms. Theo nodded once. I reached out and placed my palm against Hank Alesson's dead, cold fingers. The vision hit like the ocean. It didn't build. There was no gentle onset, no warning tingle. 1 second I was standing in a harbor master's office touching a dead man's hand. The next second I was inside his last night on Earth, wearing his terror like a second skin. Night, cold. The cliffs, but not the main cliffs, somewhere else. A section of coastline I didn't recognize. wilder, more remote. A path through old-growth spruce, branches like reaching hands in the dark. The sound of the ocean was louder here, closer, as if the cliff edge was just steps away. I was Hank. I felt his body, the ache in his knees, the calluses on his palms, the racing of his heart. He was afraid. Deeply, molecularly afraid. The kind of fear that rewrites your body chemistry and turns your blood to something thinner. But he was still walking, toward the cliff edge. Toward the sound. Firelight. A ring of flames on a flat stone outcrop that jutted over the ocean like a stage. Figures in dark clothing, 3, 4, 5, standing at the perimeter. Chanting. The language was nothing I recognized. Nothing I could place in any linguistic family I knew. It sounded like the ocean had learned to speak. A woman at the center. I saw her through Hank's eyes, and my whole psychic being lurched with recognition. I'd never seen this woman before, but I knew her. Not knew, recognized. The way you recognize a shape in a dream. She was beautiful in a way that was not entirely human. The proportions slightly too perfect, the stillness slightly too complete. Dark hair. Eyes that reflected the firelight like glass. Half lit by the flames, she looked like a portrait that had stepped out of its frame. The chanting intensified. Hank's terror was a physical weight on my chest. He wanted to run, but his legs wouldn't move, whether from fear or from something else. Something that held him in place like gravity had become personal. And then the sound. From below the cliffs. From the water. Rising, not a sound, a presence. A vibration that I felt in my bones, in my teeth, in the space behind my eyes. Something was answering the chanting. Something vast. Something that lived in the dark water below the cliffs. Something that had been sleeping for a very long time, and was now, slowly, turning its attention upward. Hank screamed. The vision fragmented. I came back to the harbormaster's office with a gasp that tore out of my throat like something physical. My knees buckled. The room tilted. Dex caught me. His arms came around me and his bare skin touched mine, forearms against my wrists, his chest warm through his t-shirt. He'd found a shirt at some point. Though I'd been too focused on the dead man to notice when. His hands gripping my upper arms as he steadied me, and for one disorienting, devastating second, Hank Oleson's death vision overlapped with something else entirely. A flash, not a memory, not a secret. Present tense. Dex's internal landscape, raw and unfiltered, rushing through the contact point where his skin met mine. Desire. Not casual, not abstract. Specific, detailed, and aimed at me like a spotlight. I saw myself through Dex's eyes, and what he saw when he looked at me was not the hollow-eyed psychic clinging to a dead man's hand. He saw my mouth, my throat, the way my hair fell across my face when I was concentrating. He saw me laughing at something he'd said at the abyss 2 weeks ago, and the image was saturated with a wanting so intense, it felt like standing too close to a bonfire. I gasped again for entirely different reasons, and pulled away. Dex held on for a half-second too long, then released me. His face was flushed, his eyes were wide. You okay? His voice was rough. Fine. I was not fine. I was vibrating with the aftershock of two entirely different visions, one of ancient terror and one of very modern, very explicit desire. And my body didn't know which one to process first. I'm fine. I need water. Theo was already there, a cup in his hand, his other hand hovering near my elbow without touching. He'd heard me say, "Don't touch me until it's over." He was following the rules. He was always following the rules, and the care in that restraint made my chest ache in a way that was completely inappropriate given the circumstances. I drank the water. I breathed. I did not think about what Dex had been thinking about. I absolutely did not think about the particular image that had been at the center of his desire, which was... Nope. Crime scene. Focus. Dead man. What did you see? Theo asked softly. I told them about the vision. The cliff, the figures, the chanting, the woman, the sound from the water. I told them everything. Everything except the Dex part. That evening, the three of us took our usual booth at the Abyss. The Abyss was Augusta Cliff's only bar, and it was, by any reasonable standard, insane. Built into the cliff face itself, literally carved into the rock, with the back half of the bar cantilevered over the 200-foot drop, it featured exposed stone walls, driftwood furniture, and a glass floor section in the back room that let you look straight down into the churning Pacific below. The owner had either been a visionary or a lunatic, and in Augusta Cliffs, those were the same thing. The main room was warm, loud, and smelled like beer, fried halibut, and the particular cedar and salt scent of a building that had been absorbing ocean air for decades. Ren Akiyama was behind the bar, moving with the fluid economy of someone who'd been pouring drinks since they could reach the taps. 25. Japanese Tellingut. Non-binary, beautiful in a way that made people order drinks they didn't want, just to have an excuse to stand at the bar a little longer. Ren saw everything, heard everything, remembered everything. In a town this size, that made them more powerful than the mayor. The usual for the unholy trinity? Ren called as we slid into the booth, the one in the corner, under a porthole window that framed a perfect circle of darkening sky. Whiskey, Dex said. Tea, Theo said. Both, I said. Ren delivered without comment, because Ren understood that when the three of us showed up together looking like we'd been through something, the correct response was alcohol, not questions. Before I joined the booth, I lingered at the bar. Ren was polishing a glass with the meditative focus of someone performing a ritual. Can I ask you something? I said. The founding families, what do the locals actually say about them? Ren set the glass down. Their dark eyes evaluated me, deciding how much truth I could handle. Depends who you ask. Tourists think it's quaint history. 5 families settle a remote coast, build a town. Very frontier spirit. And the non-tourists. My grandmother was Tellingut. This was Tellingut land long before the founders arrived. She said the 5 families didn't find Augusta Cliffs. They were called here. Something in the water wanted them. Ren's voice dropped. 5 patriarchs from 5 different countries, New England, Ireland, Bavaria, Russia, and God knows where for the Hargroves. Different languages, different continents, same dream. Cliffs above the ocean, a town where the veil was thin. Dreams sent by what? By whatever's in the deep water. My grandmother called it lonely, said it sent out a call and the 5 families answered because they were the kind of people who could hear it. People with hunger for something beyond the ordinary world. Ren fixed me with a look. Sound like anyone you know, Marlowe? I took a long drink of whiskey and didn't answer. The pact was a bargain, Ren continued. Prosperity in exchange for containment. Good fishing, calm waters, a town that thrived. In return, the families kept the barrier intact. Made offerings. A pause. Every generation, one member of each family went to the cliff edge and gave the deep one what it wanted. Contact. A few minutes of psychic communion. A taste of human desire, human fear, human love. Like feeding a starving animal through the bars of a cage. Ren picked up another glass. The offering stopped in 1989. Your grandmother, and the thing has been starving ever since. From across the bar, Dex's laugh rang out, bright, full, infectious. Theo was shaking his head, fighting a smile. Those two, Ren said, following my gaze. They look at you like you're the answer to a question they didn't know they were asking. They look at each other the same way. I know. Ren's smile was knowing and slightly wicked. The 3 of you are going to be a lot of trouble, aren't you? We're already a lot of trouble. Good, this town needs trouble that isn't the murderous kind. Our booth had a specific geometry. Dex sprawled on one side, taking up more than his share of space, because Dex's body existed at a scale that made standard furniture feel inadequate. His thigh pressed against mine. I had not asked for this proximity, and I did not move away from it. Theo sat across from us, leaning forward with his elbows on the table, his glasses reflecting the amber light, making eye contact that felt like being gently X-rayed. This was us, This was what we did. The three of us, in this booth, at this bar, working through whatever the week had thrown at us with whiskey and tea, and the particular alchemy of three people who fit together in ways none of us had entirely figured out. Ren dropped off the drinks and paused just long enough to say, "You three are exhausting to look at, and I mean that as a compliment." "Thank you, Ren," Theo said, in the tone of a man who had been told this before and had no idea what to do with the information. Dex grinned. The grin was devastating, it always was, but tonight it had an edge to it. He was thinking about what happened in the harbormaster's office. Not the dead man. The other thing. The thing where I'd touched him and my face had done something that told him, in the language of involuntary physical reactions, that I'd seen more than his concern. I took a long drink of whiskey and changed the subject. So, a man drowned on dry land with pre-colonial symbols carved into his chest, and something in the ocean answered a ritual chant. Anyone want to start? Dex raised his glass. Love a casual Tuesday. Theo pulled out a small notebook, because of course Theo carried a notebook, and clicked his pen. Let's organize what we know. Victim, Hank Lesson, 54, fisherman, no known enemies. Cause of death, saltwater drowning, location inconsistent with ocean access. Post-mortem modification, symbols carved into the torso, origin unknown. Marlowe's vision, a ritualistic gathering on a remote section of cliffs. A woman of unknown identity at the center. An entity in the water responding to the ritual. When you put it like that, it sounds almost normal, Dex said. Nothing about this is normal, Theo said and looked at me. The woman, you said she was familiar? Not familiar, recognized. I struggled to articulate the distinction. I've never seen her face before. But when I saw her through Hank's eyes, my gift, I tapped my temple. It reacted, like a magnet finding metal. She's connected to something I know, or something I am. I just don't know what yet. And the thing in the water? I stared at the liquid in my glass. Amber, warm, entirely too shallow a metaphor for what I'd felt rising from the deep. Big, old, not hostile exactly. More like, hungry? Responding to the chanting like something being called to dinner. I paused. That's not right either. It was more intimate than that, like something being called home. The table was quiet. The bar noise washed around us. Laughter, the clink of glasses, someone playing a terrible song on the jukebox. Normal sounds, human sounds, grounding. Okay, Dex said, in the voice he used when he'd decided something. So we've got a murder with supernatural elements, a mystery woman running a ritual, and a sea monster with feelings. What's our play? It's not a sea monster, Theo and I said simultaneously, and then looked at each other. A beat. The corner of Theo's mouth twitched. I felt a flush crawl up my neck that had nothing to do with the whiskey. I'll research the symbols, Theo said. I have access to some databases that might. What databases? Dex asked. Anthropological archives. Academic resources. Theo's tone was smooth, practiced. The kind of tone that deflected without appearing to deflect. I'll also re-examine the body tomorrow. There might be trace evidence I missed in the initial exam. I'll talk to the fishing crews, Dex said. Hank had a routine, same waters, same schedule. Someone might have seen something in the days before he died. And I'll check the family records. The Morans have been on this coast since the founding. If there's a section of cliffs where rituals happen, my grandfather's maps will know about it. They both looked at me. Two pairs of eyes, blue and brown, waiting. I'll talk to Vera, I said. Dex's eyebrows rose. Theo's pen paused. Vera Kane, my grandmother, dead for 14 months. Still, intermittently and inconveniently, present. Your grandmother's ghost, Dex said carefully. My grandmother's psychic residue, I corrected, because that sounded marginally less insane. She's imprinted on the bookshop. She comes and goes. She's cryptic and annoying, and she knows more about the occult history of this town than anyone living. Is she? Theo chose his words with the precision of a man handling something delicate. Reliable? She's dead, Theo. She's not senile. Dex laughed. The real laugh, the one that crinkled his eyes and showed his teeth and made my stupid heart do something acrobatic. God, I love this town. I love this town. 3 words, said casually, meaning nothing. Meaning everything. His thigh was still warm against mine. Across the table, Theo was watching both of us with an expression that I couldn't read and didn't dare psychically investigate. We paid the tab. We left the abyss. We walked the cliff path home, 3 abreast where the path was wide enough, single file where it narrowed, the ocean roaring below us and the first stars appearing in a sky that was darkening toward the Alaskan violet of early fall. Dex's hand brushed mine. The contact was brief. Too brief for a full vision, but not too brief for sensation. A spark that traveled from my fingers up my arm and settled in my chest, warm and electric. I felt the ghost of his desire like an afterimage. Want, the particular heat of a man who'd been restraining himself for months. On the other side, the path narrowed and Theo's shoulder pressed against mine. He didn't pull away immediately. Through his sweater, I felt the warmth of his body, leaner than Dex, more contained, but radiating a heat that suggested the containment cost him. His arm against mine, hip to shoulder, for maybe 10 seconds of narrow path. I breathed in. Cedar, clean soap, and something underneath that was just Theo. Warm and specific and mine, if I wanted it. I wanted it. I wanted both of them. The realization wasn't new. I'd been sitting with it for months. But tonight, walking between them on the cliff path with the ocean below, and the stars above, and a dead man's secrets burning in my mind, the wanting felt urgent, dangerous, the kind of wanting that made people do things they couldn't undo. Nobody said anything. Everybody felt it. The air between the 3 of us was charged, humming at a frequency that had nothing to do with the deep water, and everything to do with the terrible, exhilarating, impossible fact of wanting 2 people at the same time and suspecting, from the way they looked at each other, from the way their banter had an edge that went beyond friendship, that they wanted each other too. This was the shape of us. The geometry of 3 people who orbited each other, who fit into each other's spaces, who hadn't yet named what was happening because naming it would mean dealing with it, and dealing with it would mean risking it, and risking it was something none of us could afford. We separated at the fork where the path split, Dex toward the harbor, Theo toward his apartment above the clinic, me toward the veil between. Good night, good night, good night. I walked the last 100 yards alone. The bookshop was dark. The ocean was loud. The sky was full of stars that didn't care about dead fishermen or psychic booksellers, or the particular ache of wanting 2 people at the same time. And then I heard it, rising from below the cliffs. The same sound from the vision, the deep one's voice, that low resonant hum that I'd felt through Hank Alesson's dying terror. But now I was feeling it in my own body, in my chest, in my fingertips, in the space between my ribs, in the heat low in my belly that had nothing to do with fear. Not a sound, a call, and my body, my traitorous, lonely, hungry body, was answering. I stood on the cliff path with the wind in my hair, and the hum vibrating through me like a chord struck on an instrument I didn't know I was. And I thought, I moved to the edge of the world to get away from this. The edge of the world had other plans. Expand the Theo autopsy scene with body description and tension. I watched Theo's hands. This was becoming a habit, a dangerous one, given that every detail I cataloged about Theo Vasquez was another brick in a wall I was building toward an emotion I wasn't prepared to name. His hands moved over the dead man's body with a reverence that had nothing to do with the sacred and everything to do with the particular respect a good doctor showed to a corpse. Every movement was deliberate. His fingers, long, brown, precise, probed tissue and bone with the confident gentleness of someone who understood, at a cellular level, the architecture of the human body. The way a pianist understood a keyboard. The way Dex understood the ocean. He'd pushed his sleeves up. The lean forearms were visible, the fine dark hair, the tendons that stood out when he gripped the scalpel, the visible pulse at his wrist that I could see from across the room. His body, half hidden by the lab coat, was a suggestion of things I was trying not to think about. The way the coat draped over his shoulders, the narrow waist, the long legs and pressed trousers that he somehow kept immaculate even while performing an autopsy. There was something obscene about finding a man attractive while he examined a corpse. I was aware of this. I was also aware that the awareness didn't diminish the attraction. If anything, the competence made it worse. Competence was my specific weakness. Show me someone who was extremely good at what they did, and my hindbrain lit up like a Christmas tree. Dex was competent on the water. Theo was competent with bodies, living and dead. I was surrounded by competent men, and my psychic gift was a liability, and my hormones were not helping. "You're staring," Theo said, without looking up from the body. "I'm observing the autopsy." "You're observing me observing the autopsy. There's a difference." He glanced up, and the look he gave me, quick, warm, with a thread of something that might have been amusement, or might have been heat, made me understand, with terrible clarity, that Theo Vasquez was not oblivious. He was not shy. He was not unaware of the way I looked at his hands, or the way my breathing changed when he pushed his glasses up his nose. He was choosing not to act. And the restraint, the deliberate, sustained 3-years-long restraint, was, in its own way, the most erotic thing about him. Chapter 2. Gloves Off. The sealskin gloves were on my doorstep when I opened the front door at 7 a.m. the next morning, which was before coffee, before consciousness, and before any reasonable person should be expected to deal with anonymous gifts from potentially supernatural sources. The box was wood, hand-carved, smooth, no bigger than a shoebox. Inside, nestled in cloth that smelled like lanolin and ocean, were 2 gloves made of sealskin so soft it felt like touching warm water. They were dark gray, almost black, lined with something I couldn't identify, not fur, not silk, something that tingled against my fingertips when I brushed it. The craftsmanship was extraordinary. Someone had made these by hand, with skill and intention and a lot of time. The note was on old paper, thick and slightly yellowed, in handwriting that was elegant and deliberate. "For the seer. You'll need these for what's coming." No signature, no postmark, no convenient return address. I stood in my doorway holding gloves that were nicer than anything I owned, and a note that could have been a threat or a gift or both, and I thought about every horror movie I'd ever watched where the protagonist accepted the mysterious package. I thought about how I always yelled at the screen, "Don't open it! Don't put it on! Don't be stupid!" I put them on, nothing happened. No vision, no hum, no psychic download. Just warmth. Perfect, enveloping warmth, as if the gloves had been sitting by a fire. My hands that were always cold, always guarded, always the first point of defense between me and the overwhelming intimacy of human contact, felt, for the first time in years, comfortable. I hated how much I wanted to keep them. "Oh, good," said my dead grandmother's voice from the hallway. Mysterious gifts from anonymous admirers. That always ends well in this family. Vera Kane materialized in the space between the coat rack and the bookshop door. Not fully solid, more like a suggestion of a woman rendered in cigarette smoke and disapproval. She looked the way she always looked, 70-ish, sharp-featured, silver hair pinned up in a style that had been fashionable during the Kennedy administration, wearing what appeared to be a spectral version of her favorite green cardigan. She was the most glamorous dead person I'd ever met, and I'd met several. "Good morning, Vera." "It's not a good morning, darling. A man is dead, you're receiving gifts from strangers, and you haven't made coffee yet. These are 3 separate crises. The coffee is the most fixable. Then I suggest you start there." I made coffee. Vera hovered. The sealskin gloves sat on the kitchen counter, warm and inexplicable, and I told myself I'd deal with them after caffeine. Vera watched me examine the sealskin gloves with the critical attention of a woman who had spent 70 years forming opinions and wasn't about to waste eternity keeping them to herself. "Put them down," she said. "Gifts from unknown sources are never free." "They feel protective." like someone wove safety into the leather. Someone did. That's what concerns me. Vera's spectral form drifted closer, the closest thing to physical proximity she could manage, a shimmer of silver-green light that smelled faintly of her perfume. Your grandfather gave me gloves once. Beautiful things. Kid leather lined with silk. I wore them for a year before I realized he'd woven a tracking spell into the stitching. She paused. Love and surveillance are not mutually exclusive, darling. Remember that. I thought about Theo's careful attention. The way he noticed everything, filed it away. The thought arrived unbidden and unwelcome, and I pushed it aside. Can you tell who made them? Psychically? My abilities are not what they were. Being dead has some drawbacks. She studied the gloves from a distance. But the craftsmanship is old, pre-modern. The sealskin was prepared using methods I haven't seen since. She stopped. Her form flickered. Since Isolde. The name meant nothing to me yet. In 3 days, it would mean everything. The walk to the records office took me through the heart of Orgosta Cliffs, and the heart of Orgosta Cliffs was, like most hearts, beautiful and slightly broken. Main Street, the town's only real commercial strip, ran along the cliff edge for about 6 blocks, offering views of the Pacific that real estate agents in other states would have committed crimes for. But the buildings were working class. A hardware store that sold fishing supplies and hunting licenses, a grocery that smelled like produce and diesel, a post office staffed by a woman named Gladys, who had been postmistress since the Nixon administration, and treated every piece of mail like a personal affront. I passed the clinic, Theo's domain, white clapboard with blue trim, and caught myself looking for his car. Not there. Probably at the harbor, examining the body. I imagined him bent over the examination table, glasses pushed up, those careful hands working with scalpel and precision, and the image hit me somewhere between my ribs in a way that was entirely inappropriate for 9 a.m. on a Tuesday. Old Marta Volkov was sitting on the bench outside the grocery, as she did every morning, regardless of weather. 83, wrapped in furs, watching the town with the sharp eyes of a woman who had been keeping track for decades. Good morning, Marta. Is it? She squinted at me. I heard there's a body. News traveled in Orgosta Cliffs at the speed of gossip, which was faster than light and more reliable. Yes, Henk Alesson. Humph. Marta pulled her furs tighter. The Alesson boy. His grandmother was a Hargrove, you know. I stopped walking. How do you know that? I'm 83 years old, girl. I know everything about everyone in this town because I've been paying attention while the rest of you were busy being young and stupid. She fixed me with a look that could have cured leather. The Hargroves weren't extinct, they married out, changed names, hid, but blood remembers what people forget. Why did they hide? Because the other families wanted them to. The Hargroves practiced blood magic, real blood magic, not the candle and crystals, nonsense your shop sells. They could bind spirits, summon things, open doors that were meant to stay closed. She leaned forward. In 1923, a Hargrove opened a door. What came through killed 6 people before the other families could close it. After that, the Hargroves were encouraged to become invisible. A pause. Encouraged is a polite word for what actually happened. What actually happened? What always happens when powerful people are afraid. They made the threat disappear. Marta's eyes were flinty. Your grandmother was part of it, you know? Vera Kane was many things. Brilliant, beautiful, ruthless when she needed to be. She and Eleanor Kessler and the Moran patriarch, they contained the Hargrove situation in 1989. Whatever that means. You don't know what it means? I know what I was told. That the Hargrove problem was resolved and we shouldn't ask questions. Marta snorted. I've been alive long enough to know that when someone says don't ask questions, that's exactly when you should start asking. She waved me off with a gnarled hand. I walked to the records office with the word Hargrove echoing in my skull, and the growing conviction that the past in Orgosta Cliffs wasn't past at all. It was a living thing, coiled in the foundations of the town, waiting. The Orgosta Cliffs Town Records Office was in the basement of the municipal building, a structure that had been built in 1912 and had been accumulating damp, mildew, and bureaucratic despair ever since. The records room smelled like wet paper and broken dreams, lit by fluorescent tubes that flickered with the particular rhythm of a building whose electrical system had given up on excellence. I was looking for Hank Oleson. More specifically, I was looking for Hank Oleson's family. Because in a town built by 5 founding families, where power was inherited, secrets were genealogical, and the past had a tendency to reach forward and grab you by the throat, a man's death was never just about the man. It was about his blood. The records were a mess. Decades of property transfers, birth certificates, marriage licenses, and death records stuffed into filing cabinets that had been organized by someone whose system made sense to no one but themselves. I spent 2 hours cross-referencing Oleson family documents until I found it, buried in a 1940s marriage certificate. Hank's grandmother, on his mother's side, was born a Hargrove. My hands went still on the paper. The Hargroves. One of the 5 founding families of Augusta Cliffs. The ones who, according to the town's official history, had died out after an incident in 1923. The official history didn't elaborate on what the incident was, but it was the kind of vague, ominous phrasing that, in my experience, meant something horrific had happened, and everyone had agreed to stop talking about it. I kept digging, found a photograph from 1889, the year of the founding. 5 families on the dock, formal and unsmiling in the way of 19th-century photographs. The Kanes, the Morans, the Kesslers, the Volkovs, the Hargroves. My family's patriarch stood at the left edge, looking stern. A massive man who could only be an ancestor of Dex's stood beside him. And in the center, the Hargrove patriarch, a thin, sharp-faced man with intense eyes, was holding something. An object I couldn't quite make out in the faded photograph. A stone? A book? Standing next to him was a woman. She was partially turned away from the camera, but I could see enough. The line of her jaw, the fall of her dark hair, the particular stillness of her posture. My psychic sense prickled, the same magnetic recognition I'd felt in Hank's vision. Her. I touched the photograph. Gently, just my fingertip against the old paper. The vision was brief and sharp, like a camera flash. The same woman, but in modern clothing. Jeans, a dark coat, her hair loose. She was standing on the cliff path, my cliff path, the one I walked every morning, and she was looking out at the ocean with an expression that mixed longing and calculation in equal parts. She was alive. She was here. In Augusta Cliffs, right now. I pulled my hand back. My heart was slamming. The fluorescent lights flickered. In an 1889 photograph, this woman looked exactly as she did in a present-day vision. Either she was a descendant who bore a freakish resemblance to her ancestor, or she was something else entirely. I knew which option my gift was betting on. I found Dex on the asking price, hauling crab pots with the methodical efficiency of a man whose body knew the work so well, his mind could be somewhere else entirely. His somewhere else, based on the expression he aimed at me when I climbed aboard uninvited, was approximately where I was standing. Kane, to what do I owe the pleasure? You didn't tell me Hank Oleson was at your family's dinner table 2 days before he died. The hauling stopped. Dex straightened, the rope still in his hands, his forearms taut. The sun was behind him, turning him into a silhouette with unfairly well-defined edges. The boat rocked beneath us, a gentle, rhythmic motion that put us slightly off balance, slightly too aware of our own bodies in space. Who told you that? Town records. His name was in your father's guest log at the Moran house. Hank Oleson, dinner, September 3rd, 2 days before he was found dead. Dex set down the rope. He looked out at the harbor, then back at me, and I watched the decision happen on his face, the moment he chose honesty over deflection. It was a good face for watching decisions. Everything showed. Hank came to my dad about something. Old family business, founding family stuff. He said the phrase founding family stuff the way other people said tax issues, with resignation and mild nausea. Dad won't tell me what, just said Hank was scared, and it was a Moran matter, and I should stay out of it. Your father told a scared man to handle it himself, and 2 days later that man was dead. I know what it looks like, Marlowe. It looks like your father might know why Hank Oleson was murdered. Dex's jaw tightened. For a moment, the easy, grinning fisherman disappeared, and I saw someone harder underneath, someone who loved his family and feared what they might be capable of. My dad is a lot of things. He's not a killer. I didn't say he was. I'm saying he knows something. He won't talk to you. He might not have a choice. The boat rocked. A wave slapped the hull, and I stumbled. A small loss of balance, nothing dramatic, except that Dex's hand shot out to catch me, and his fingers closed around my bare wrist. Skin. Bare skin, where my sleeve had ridden up, his calloused fingers against the thin skin over my pulse point. The flash was instantaneous. Not a memory. Not a secret. Present tense. Undiluted wanting. A blast of desire so vivid, it whited out my vision for a full second. I felt what Dex was feeling in this exact moment. The heat of my wrist under his fingers, my pulse against his thumb, the scent of my hair in the salt wind. I saw what he wanted to do, pull me closer, press me against the wheelhouse wall, put his mouth on the spot where my neck met my shoulder, and I pulled my hand away like I'd touched a stove. We stared at each other. The boat rocked. The harbor went on existing, oblivious to the fact that the air between us had just caught fire. Sorry, Dex said. His voice was rough. I forgot. He didn't forget. He never forgot. He just couldn't stop himself, and the fact that I hadn't stopped him, had, for a fraction of a second, leaned into the contact before my rational mind caught up, was a piece of information we were both now in possession of, and neither of us was prepared to discuss. It's fine, I said. You're blushing. It's the wind. There's no wind. Then it's the audacity. I straightened my sleeve, pulling it down over my wrist, covering the skin that was still tingling with the ghost of his touch. Talk to your father, Dex. Find out what Hank told him. I need to know what founding family business means, because right now it means a dead man and symbols that nobody can read. He nodded. His eyes hadn't left my face. I'll talk to him. Thank you. Kane? I was already moving toward the gangplank. I turned. Whatever you saw just now. His voice was quiet, serious. The grin was gone. When you touched me, I know you see things. I know that's what the gloves are about. So whatever you saw, I'm not sorry for it. I held his gaze for 3 seconds longer than I should have. Then I turned and walked off the boat, my wrist burning and my heart hammering, and I did not look back because looking back would have been a concession that I was not yet ready to make. Theo's clinic was a converted house 2 blocks from the harbor, white clapboard, blue trim, a waiting room that smelled like antiseptic, and the lavender he kept in a vase on the reception desk because he believed healing environments should engage all the senses. He was exactly the kind of doctor who believed that. I found him in the examination room after hours, changed out of his clinic coat into a gray Henley that was doing criminal things to his collarbones. His sleeves were pushed up, revealing the lean forearms I'd been cataloging for months, the visible tendons when he gripped a pen, the fine dark hair, the way his watch sat loose on his wrist and slid when he gestured. Theo's body was a study in controlled precision. Everything measured, everything intentional, even the way he sat, one leg crossed over the other, ankle on knee, a posture of deliberate relaxation that said, I am choosing to be comfortable in your presence in a way that was, paradoxically, extremely attractive. He was surrounded by books, his laptop open to multiple browser tabs, his glasses pushed up into his hair in the way that meant he'd been concentrating hard enough to forget they were there. Without the glasses, his face was different. More open, more vulnerable, the careful composure stripped back to reveal the intensity underneath. He looked up when I walked in. The look lasted a fraction of a second too long, and in that fraction, I saw something flicker across his face, a warmth that he smoothed over so quickly I might have imagined it. I didn't imagine it. I never imagined it with Theo. I just pretended I did, because the alternative was acknowledging that the quiet doctor with the steady hands and the kind eyes looked at me like I was something precious, and that was a weight I didn't know how to carry. "I have findings," he said, and the professional mask was back. He walked me through the full autopsy results. The symbols had been carved with a blade that was inhumanly sharp. No tool marks consistent with any known surgical or industrial instrument. The salt water in Hank's lungs matched the ocean composition at the base of the cliffs, but there were trace elements present that didn't correspond to any known Pacific water. Minerals that Theo couldn't identify without a spectrometer he didn't have. But the symbols. He pulled up an image on his laptop. "I've been cross-referencing them against every petroglyphic database I can access. They're a hybrid. Elements of Tlingit symbolic language, elements of something older, pre-Tlingit, possibly pre-Dean, possibly pre-everything. And they're not decorative." "What are they?" "If I'm reading the pattern correctly, and I want to be clear that I'm extrapolating from fragmentary sources across multiple academic disciplines, they're a binding language, used to anchor something to a location." He paused, like a nail driven into a map. I stared at the screen. The symbols that had been carved into a dead man's chest, rendered in clean digital lines, looked almost like art. "Anchor what?" "That's the question I can't answer yet." He leaned back, rubbed his eyes. His glasses fell back onto his nose. "But if these are anchoring symbols, then Hank isn't just a victim. He's a waypoint." The implications settled over me like cold water. "You're saying someone carved a supernatural GPS marker into a dead fisherman." "I'm saying the symbols function as a fixed point in a larger pattern. If there are other points, then someone is building a map, a network, a circle." "Yes." We looked at each other across the examination room, and the air between us held the weight of everything we weren't saying. That this was beyond police work, beyond medicine, beyond anything rational or explicable. That we were standing at the edge of something deep and dark and old, and the only tools we had were a psychic bookseller, a too brilliant small-town doctor, and a fisherman with a reckless streak and forearms that could open jars. It was objectively not enough. "Theo." "Yes?" "Your research. The databases, the cross-referencing. It's really good. Suspiciously good for a small-town GP." Something shifted behind his eyes. A flicker of something I couldn't name. Not guilt, not fear, but a close relative of both. "I have broad interests. You're cross-referencing obscure anthropological archives that I didn't know existed, and I own an occult bookshop. I'm thorough. You're something." He held my gaze. For a moment, the mask was thin enough that I could almost see through it, almost see the real shape of Theo Vasquez, the one that lived underneath the kind doctor and the careful friend. Then the mask thickened, and he smiled, and the moment passed. I let it pass. I shouldn't have. But I let it because Theo was my friend and my anchor, and the person who caught me when visions knocked me off my feet, and I wasn't ready to pull on threads that might unravel that. Not yet. The abyss, later. The back room with the glass floor. Wren had pulled me aside with the particular economy of movement that meant they had something worth hearing. The back room was empty. It usually was on weeknights, reserved for special occasions and the kind of conversations that required the vertiginous intimacy of standing over a 200-foot drop with nothing but glass between you and the ocean. "Hank was in here 3 nights before he died," Wren said, leaning against the bar with their arms crossed. The dim lighting caught the glint of their septum ring. "Drunk, talking loud, which wasn't like him. Hank was a quiet drunk, usually. Nursed 1 beer and stared at the TV. "What was he talking about?" "The old deal." "What's owed?" Kept saying those phrases like a mantra. Wren paused. "He wasn't alone. Back booth, someone I couldn't see clearly. Female. Well-dressed. I caught a flash of silk or something expensive when she shifted. They argued. She was calm. He was terrified." "Could you hear her?" "Bits. She said something like, 'The terms are the terms and the time is now.' And Hank said, 'I remember this clearly because it made 0 sense at the time. You can't use living anchors. Vera Kane sealed you for a reason.'" The name hit me like a physical blow. Vera Kane sealed you. My grandmother. The woman in the vision. Sealed. The pieces clicked together with the sickening precision of a puzzle I hadn't known I was solving. Ren, this is important. Did Hank say her name? The woman he was arguing with? Ren shook their head. But there's something else. They lowered their voice, though we were alone. A lot of people have been having weird dreams this month. Ocean dreams. People talk when they drink, Marlo, and the regulars have been talking about the water like it's talking back. Like there's something down there that's been whispering to them in their sleep. Through the glass floor beneath our feet, the ocean churned. Dark water, 200 feet of empty air, and somewhere in the black depths, something that hummed in a frequency I was beginning to know intimately. I looked down through the glass. The water moved. Waves, currents, the constant restless motion of the Pacific. Something moved differently. Just for a second. A shape. Too large, too purposeful, too briefly visible to identify, passing through the deep water beneath the abyss. Probably a fish, probably. Midnight. The cliff path. 3 people who should have been sleeping, walking the edge of the world instead. The whiskey from the abyss was warm in our stomachs. The investigation talk had given way to the other kind of talk, the kind that happened when your guard was down and the darkness made everything feel safer than it was. Your taste in music is a war crime, Dex said to Theo. My taste in music is sophisticated. You listen to jazz, Theo, voluntarily, without a gun to your head. Jazz is the highest form of... If you say musical expression, I'm pushing you off this cliff. I was going to say intellectual achievement, and I'd like to see you try. I walked between them, listening to them bicker, and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Safe. Not the absence of danger. Danger was clearly present, in the form of a murdered fisherman and ancient symbols, and the thing in the water. But the particular safety of being flanked by 2 people who would walk into the dark with me, who would argue about jazz while the world fell apart, who made the terrifying business of being alive feel manageable. Dex's hand brushed mine. The path was narrow here, pressed together by encroaching bushes, and his knuckles grazed my fingers in a way that could have been accidental. The contact was too brief for a vision. Just warmth. Just a reminder. Theo's shoulder bumped mine from the other side. Warm wool and the faint scent of cedar and medical-grade soap. He didn't pull away immediately. Neither did I. We reached the overlook, the wide spot in the path where the cliff fell away, and the view opened to the full oceanic expanse, the sky enormous above us, the water a black mirror below. We stopped without discussing it, because this was where we always stopped. Dex broke the silence. His voice was quiet, stripped of its usual lightness. Hank told my dad something before he died. He said something was coming up from the deep. That it had been sleeping since 1889, and it was waking up. The words settled over us like snow. Theo took off his glasses and cleaned them, which was what he did when he was processing something enormous. Without the glasses, his eyes were large and dark and full of a concern that he usually filtered through clinical detachment. I stared at the water. The hum was there, faint, persistent, like a song heard through walls. I felt it in my chest, in my fingertips, lower, between my thighs, a sympathetic resonance that I couldn't explain and couldn't ignore. The Deep One's call wasn't just auditory. It was physical. It was reaching into me in places that had nothing to do with my ears, and everything to do with the particular vulnerability of a body that was designed to feel. Closer than last night. Whatever was down there, it was rising. I walked the last stretch alone, as always. Key in the lock. Door open. The bookshop dark. The smell of old paper and bergamot and home. The sealskin gloves were on the kitchen counter where I'd left them. I looked at them for a long time. Then I picked them up and put them on. The vision hit. Not from a person. From the gloves themselves. Objects didn't usually hold visions. It took strong emotion or intentional psychic imprinting to leave a readable trace on an inanimate thing. These gloves had been imprinted deliberately. Hands making the gloves. A woman's hands, working by firelight, the sealskin supple under her fingers. She sewed with a needle made of bone and thread that shimmered faintly. Each stitch was deliberate, not just craft, but ritual. She was sewing intention into the leather. Protection, warmth, and something else, a beacon. A way to be found. The woman looked up. Directly at me. Through the vision, across whatever distance separated us. She had the face from the photograph, from Hank's death vision. Dark hair, eyes like firelit glass. And she smiled, not threatening, not kind. Knowing. There you are, she said. I've been waiting. The vision ended. The gloves were warm. My hands were shaking. From the direction of the cliffs, the hum rose again, louder, closer, almost like an answer to a question I hadn't asked. I took the gloves off. I put them in a drawer. I poured myself a whiskey and sat in the dark bookshop with my grandmother's ghost flickering at the edge of my vision, and the ocean singing its impossible song, and I thought, this is it. This is the thing I came here to escape. This is the thing I was always going to find. The dead were talking, the deep was singing, and a woman who should have been dust was waiting for me with a smile that said she'd been waiting a very long time. I drank the whiskey. I didn't sleep. Tomorrow I'd start hunting. More town lore, conversation with a fisherman at the harbor. On the dock, waiting for Dex to finish his haul, I fell into conversation with old Pete Kessler, Eleanor's cousin, 72, missing 3 fingers from a winch accident in 1987, and in possession of the kind of leathery charisma that came from spending 5 decades arguing with the Pacific Ocean. You're the cane girl, he said, baiting a hook with the automatic efficiency of someone whose hands did the work while his mouth did the talking. Vera's granddaughter. That's me. Your grandmother was a hell of a woman. Saved my life once, 1986, I think. I was out past the shelf and the water went wrong. Not a storm, the water itself. Changed color, changed temperature, changed mood. He paused, hook suspended. I know that sounds crazy. Nothing sounds crazy to me anymore. The ocean has moods, girl. It gets angry. Gets sad, gets lonely. Mostly it's patient. Patient like a mountain is patient. Like a thing that knows it'll outlast everything. But that day in '86, it was hungry. I could feel it in the hull, in the water against my hands. Something down there wanted me. What happened? Your grandmother showed up. In a boat she shouldn't have known how to drive, wearing a dress she shouldn't have been wearing on the ocean, looking like she was on her way to a cocktail party rather than a rescue mission. She stood on the bow and she put her hands in the water and she... Pete's voice went soft. She sang to it, not words, more like humming. And the ocean calmed down. The color came back. The temperature normalized. And the thing that had been hungry went back to sleep. She never told me that. Vera never told anyone anything unless it served her purposes. But here's the thing. Pete leaned forward. After that day, the ocean was different around this coast. Gentler. Like it remembered being soothed and was grateful. Your grandmother didn't just save me. She communicated with whatever's down there. Made it understand that there were people up here worth being gentle for. He looked at me with the sharp assessment of a man who'd survived 7 decades of ocean and wasn't impressed by anything except the water. You've got her gift. I can tell. Same eyes, same way of looking at people like you're reading the fine print. Whatever's happening in this town, the body, the symbols, the things people are whispering about, you're the one who's going to have to deal with it. Just like Vera dealt with it. Just like every Kane has dealt with it, going back to the founding. How did they deal with it? By being braver than they had any right to be, and by never ever going alone. He gestured toward the boat where Dex was working, muscles moving under his thermal shirt. That Moran boy, he's got the ocean in him, I can see it. His grandfather was the same. And the doctor? Pete squinted toward the clinic. The doctor sees things other people don't. Not like you, differently. He sees the shape of problems. The architecture of what's wrong. You're a perceptive man, Pete. I'm a fisherman. We watch the water and we watch the weather and we watch the people around us, because all three will kill you if you stop paying attention. He went back to his hook. Take care of those boys, king girl, and let them take care of you. The ocean respects a crew. Expand the boat scene, more dialogue, more physical tension. The boat rocked. That was the problem with boats. They rocked, constantly. A gentle rhythm that put your body in motion without your consent, that shifted your weight and your center of gravity and your proximity to whoever else was aboard. Dex and I were standing maybe 2 feet apart, and every swell brought us closer, and every recovery pushed us back, and the oscillation, toward away, was doing things to my nervous system that had nothing to do with the ocean. Tell me about the Hargroves, I said, aiming for professional and landing somewhere in the vicinity of breathless. The Hargroves. Dex leaned against the wheelhouse, arms crossed, which was a crime against the sleeveless shirt he was wearing, because crossing his arms made his biceps do something geometrically unreasonable. Blood magic family, the most feared of the 5. My dad used to say the Morans navigated, the Kesslers bound, the Volkovs weathered, the Kanes saw, and the Hargroves bled. Bled? Blood magic runs on sacrifice. The stronger the sacrifice, the stronger the spell. The Hargroves were willing to go further than anyone else. Cut deeper, bleed more. He paused. There's a reason the town erased them from official history. In 1923, a Hargrove opened a door using blood sacrifice. What came through killed 6 people before my grandfather and your great-grandmother managed to close it. 6 people. 6, including 2 children. Dex's jaw tightened. After that, the other families decided the Hargrove bloodline was too dangerous. They were, I don't want to say purged, but my dad's word was discouraged. The Hargroves who survived married out. Changed names, hid. Like Hank Alesson's grandmother. Like Hank's grandmother, the bloodline went underground. But blood magic doesn't disappear just because you change your name. It's in the DNA. Dormant, maybe, but present. He looked at me. Which is why whoever killed Hank, whoever carved those symbols, chose a Hargrove descendant. The binding ritual requires specific bloodlines at specific anchor points. Hargrove blood for the fear frequency. You know more about this than you've been letting on. I know what my grandfather told me before he died. Stories I thought were fairy tales until a man washed up on the rocks with pre-colonial symbols on his chest. His eyes held mine. My grandfather said the deep one wasn't dangerous. It was desperate, and the founding family's response, caging it, feeding it scraps of psychic contact to keep it pacified, was cruelty dressed up as prudence. The boat rocked. We swayed toward each other. His hand caught my hip, steadying me or pulling me closer, or both. And even through my clothing, the contact sent a thread of psychic warmth through me. Not a vision, just a feeling. His skin knowing my skin through fabric, the particular heat of hands that wanted more than they were taking. Careful, he said. But he didn't let go. Dex? Yeah? Your hand is on my hip. I know. Are you going to move it? Do you want me to? The honest answer was no. The honest answer was that his hand on my hip, warm and proprietary and careful, felt like the first right thing to happen all week. The honest answer was that I wanted him to move his hand, not away but closer, up my side, into my hair, across every piece of skin I kept hidden under gloves and layers, and the careful choreography of a life designed to avoid exactly this. Not yet, I said. He smiled. Not the grin, something softer. His thumb traced a small circle on my hip through my jacket. 1 revolution, 2. Then he released me, and the absence of his hand was a cold spot that the ocean wind couldn't explain.